Good afternoon. I'm Dara Bunjon. I am the food enthusiast here at J More Living. I'm a food writer, food stylist, PR maven, and a frustrated baker. Those of you joining us live, feel free to drop comments or questions for my guests into the comment box, and you'll see me checking from time to time and watching the other screen. At 8 years old of age, Bill Brady had his first camera and darkroom. The Italian family table with Sunday dinners is the genesis for his love of food. When he learned you can make a living photographing food, there was no other path for him. From still for let's see if the mouth will work. From still photography to film. Recently, he directed P.F. Chang's video spots. An author of More Digital Food Photography, he is also a lecturer. He just launched a smartphone food photography course and specifically designed for chefs called chefsshootfood.com. Let's welcome Bill. Well, hello there, Bill, and welcome to the show.
Oh, hello, Darren. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Uh, I'm glad I can finally meet up with you. We're sort of LinkedIn buddies and connecting that way. Other than doing the show today, I know that you did a podcast right before this. Tell me that there's not one after this. What else is on the plate to do?
Um, I actually have to shoot some vape pens for a cannabis company.
Okay, work, work, work. So, growing up in Brooklyn, Italian family, Sunday dinners. Can you give us an idea? I'm always into the family table, and since this was your inspiration, and I married an Italian man, and his two aunties, one was not married, the other one was married. Every holiday, it was gravy, meatballs, lasagna, kitchen in the basement. And I think that rings true with what you grew up with. Tell me a bit about your family table, and let's talk about your grandfather in there. So the floor is yours. Go for it.
Sure. So I actually grew up in Long Island. My parents are from Brooklyn, and my grandparents lived in Brooklyn. They lived on Bay 20th Street and Cropsey Avenue. And then my grandfather owned a bar called Puffy's Bar and Grill, which is still in existence. It's called Puffy's Tavern. So every Sunday we'd go to my grandmother's house for macaroni and gravy. They didn't call it pasta back then. And so, we drive to Brooklyn from Port Washington, Long Island. It would take about an hour. And, we'd park and, you walk into my grandmother's basement. We never went upstairs other than, to use the restroom. But, upstairs had a full kitchen and a living room and a dining room, but that was for company. But they never had company because it was just our family. And for some reason, they just loved the basement. So you'd walk into my grandmother's basement, and there would be those, the chili peppers hanging up to dry next to the boiler. You'd walk down a long, dark hallway, and then suddenly you would be in the basement. My grandfather actually, he had five daughters, and he had his own table. He would sit at a separate table, and then we had like a giant, like restaurant style booth for the whole family. So at any given point, there was like 15 or 20 of us crammed into this basement, sometimes more. And, you walk in, you smell the meatballs frying, the sauce cooking. My grandmother actually had a fairly eclectic taste too for a Italian woman, and so she would make snails and all different kinds of food, and I'd help her grind the breadcrumbs from the stale bread, and I was the tester. I was a little chunky as a kid, and I would always like take the fried meatballs and the bacon, little bacon fat, and all that stuff. But my grandmother was a wonderful cook, and she was a wonderful lady, and my family was very loving, and lots of coffee, cigarettes, and and food. You'd go on Sunday afternoon after church and spend 1 o'clock we'd eat, and then we'd leave around 7, 8 o'clock at night. Usually you just eat the whole day. So
Yeah,
it was a really lovely experience.
I don't know where it was or something that I read about the family table. Um, my husband's aunties had the stove in the kitchen, a second one in the basement, and that's where they prepared all the food. We were up in the dining room. But you start your day, you come in after church or whatever the holiday is, you eat, you have dessert, you take a nap, you start all over again. Um,
Exactly.
right. Going back to your grandfather's Puffy's Tavern. Now, it was named after a World War II veteran. Was that your grandfather or was it a buddy of his who passed away? Do you know?
So actually, no, this is the story. So my grandfather, his father died when he was 11, and so he had to like earn a living. He was shining shoes on the Staten Island Ferry, and when he was a teenager, he was kind of got into a dubious career, which was he was running booze, you know, during Prohibition, and he got caught. And so, because he was a minor, he didn't have to go to jail, but he could never get a liquor license. So my grandfather was a barman for many, many years. And when he wanted to open up his own bar, he went into business with his brother, who he was Uncle Puffy, and he insisted that they name the bar after him. So that's the reason why it's called Puffy. It was originally Puffy's Bar and Grill, and then when my grandmother sold it, they changed it to Puffy's Tavern.
Yeah, it still exists. It's down in Tribeca.
Yeah,
And I think when your grandfather had it, it was more Tribeca wasn't Tribeca at that time. No, I mean it was a lot of workers and things like that.
yeah. So the
Um,
dock workers would pay my grandfather off with ill-gotten gains from they were unloading trucks, and so like it was not uncommon for my grandfather to walk in with a giant wheel of Parmesan cheese that somebody gave him as payment for bar services, and then he would cut it up and give it to my mom and all the daughters, and they would sell it to we would sell it to the neighbors. In Long Island we had um, a lot of Jewish families, we had a lot of Italian families. So the Italian families across the street on the restaurant, we would sell them like half the cheese, because you know, it was all profit at that point. So.
yes, absolutely. So love of food, we understand. The Italian background, obviously. But at 8 years old, to have a camera and a dark room, explain to me how that came about.
Well, I was on a trip to Bermuda with my parents. My dad actually worked for he installed mainframe computers in banks. So we actually lived in Bermuda for a little while. We lived in Switzerland and Paris and whatnot. And when I was in Bermuda, my parents had this Kodak camera, and we were at some function, and I picked it up and I just started playing with it, and I fell in love with the mechanics of it. And I wasn't really a strong reader. Turns out I have a little bit of dyslexia, and so I always gravitated towards pictures in books. And my dad had this huge library, and a lot of the books were those Time Life books, and Life magazines and all that. And I just remember just like leafing through those, and I never even cared about what the words said. The pictures just captivated me, and I wanted to do that. So I started taking pictures. Um, just happened to be a darkroom club in my elementary school. And when I was in the third grade, I joined it, and they
Oh,
taught me how to do, darkroom stuff. And then my dad got me like a little like a little enlarger. And, I loved it. I loved the whole process of it. And, I could not consume enough photography knowledge. As a kid, like that was just something that I, that I care, like I was very passionate about it. So I
well,
can't explain it other than that.
yeah, we were discussing earlier, you are a storyteller, and with the slight reading disability, I'm a slow reader.
Right.
I don't have dyslexia, but my husband and I'd be looking and reading something that he's reading, and he turned the page, and I have to read every word. So I had something in mind. We had the camera, the dark room, got it. You are, like I said, a storyteller. So the photos I understand, and you do write well from the things that I saw on your photography page, which is billbradyphotography.com. And the application, just to remind people, chefsshootfood.com. All that information will float up in the comments section. But going to either one, you'll be able to connect with Bill. All right. So high school, you went to what was it, SUNY
Yeah, so
College?
I started out my college career at SUNY at Stony Brook, and I did my freshman year there. I didn't like it. I left, and I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. I got a job in a restaurant in a country club, and started out as a busboy, and then within like a month, I was a waiter and then a bartender. There was a lot of turnover because it was seasonal and people were a little kooky, and the hours were crazy. It was like 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. So I really loved the restaurant business. Like I the whole hum and the excitement of it, and I applied to photography school. I was going to go to St. John's, and they did their entire major of photography in 1 year in a tech school called Center for the Media Arts in Manhattan. Um, but the St. John's tuition was $12,000 for the year, and the Center for the Media Arts was $4,000 for the year. So I went there. I got a degree in photography, and then I went back to college. I went to SUNY New Paltz, and for the same price, I got a full college degree. And then I studied marketing and advertising in college, and I kind of combined both of those things into my and I molded those into my career.
When you were working at the country club and bartending, were you playing around with photographing some of the stuff that you were plating, or
No,
nah, nah? Just
it,
curious when that bug hit you and you realize there's money to be made in this. And going back then, there were no cell phones. You didn't have a camera in it. If you had good equipment, it was Nikon or it was Canon. Um, is there one that you prefer? My husband was into Nikon, so I'm just curious.
So I shoot with Nikons. I actually still shoot with Nikons. I also shoot with the medium format system, which is more professional. But when I left college, I got a job. I got two jobs. First, I got a job as a salesman because I was a little shy. I didn't want to be a salesman, but I needed to overcome that shyness. And I worked for this crazy telephone company in New York, and it was like, I don't know if you ever seen the movie Tin Men, but like it was these crazy characters, and I kind of overcame that. I quit that job, and I got a job in a publishing company, and I worked there for about 2 years, and I absolutely hated it. Like I hadn't been really shooting a lot. I was just, kind of feeling my way out of school. It was a really bad, it was like 1989 at that point, bad recession. And I noticed my camera under my bed and I picked it up and I started shooting again. And so I would go out and like that became like a release from like being at work. And then I realized like about a year in, I really want to be a photographer. But there was, no internet, there was no path. Didn't know food photography existed. So, pardon me. I quit my job. I didn't have another job. People thought I was crazy, and I'm like, I was living in an apartment with a couple of friends, and I think our rent was like $300 each. It wasn't that hard to make that much money, and I just, kind of started doing headshots and things like that, and it wasn't. I didn't love it, and my neighbor just coincidentally he worked for a tabletop director named Alex Fernbach, and he said he was moving up and they needed like a production assistant. So I went and they hired me, and they were shooting food. But it was motion, big 35 millimeter cameras shooting Wendy's
Right.
commercials and all that stuff. And I was like, oh, you could do that? That's really cool. And then as soon as like I sort of the like that was the aha moment where I was like, oh, and then they would let me shoot stills because they knew that I wasn't like a film person. I was just kind of doing that to make make my rent. But I love film production. It was just a little too intense in terms of the number of hours. We'd work like 100-hour weeks. It was crazy. But I love the shoots, and I love the fact that you could do food. And one of the producers that was I worked with on a shoot knew a food photographer who was kind of at the end of his career. Wasn't really shooting a lot of food, but his client was the Food Emporiums in New York, which was a subsidiary of A&P. And so I started assisting him. I started working with the ad agency, and we were kind of doing, the digital shooting film, but then scanning it and making it, pre-press. So I learned all that kind of stuff and photo retouching. And eventually what happened was they retired him and they asked me to go into business because I was a photographer. Now, I never really shot food, so I kind of faked it. But we had gotten into a digital workflow at that point. So I would send in like, I'd shoot 15 shots and half of them were terrible, but the other half weren't. And the client was thrilled because they were getting way more. Back then, you only do like 1 or 2 shots in a day, 2 or 3, whatever. And so they were getting like triple the output. And so in 40 days, I kind of like learned how to just do it. I just didn't care. Fake it till you make it. I mean, obviously, I already knew how to do photography, and I had assisted, and but doing it on your own, it's a little scary, especially, am I going to fail? Am I going to face plant? And I took to it pretty fast, though.
Well, I think, sometimes we have more of a fear of succeeding than we do of failing. Because if we succeed, it's like, what's next? I'm not sort of prepared for that. But you've done so much with the companies you work with, Moet, Hennessy, Absolute, Sara Lee, Godiva, Tefal, Ronzoni, Walmart, Welch's, Krispy Kreme, Saga, Angry Orchard, Boar's Head. That's pretty impressive. Now, you're in New York. I know I was involved with the International Association of Culinary Professionals ages ago when I worked for Van Spices. And I know a lot of the food photography came out of Chicago. There were big companies there. And so when I saw Sara Lee, I went, oh, did you go to Chicago a bit to do any photography? It was all here in New York area.
Yeah, most of my career has been based in New York. I had a studio on 35th Street in Manhattan, right across the street from Macy's for about 12, 13 years with the agency. And then when A&P, excuse me, and then when A&P folded, we kind of went our separate ways, and I had to rebuild my career. But the interesting thing that happened was the day that we lost the Food Emporium, I got a call from Walmart, and it was like the largest job of my career. So I shot like 400 package shots for the Great Value brand, and we worked for about 14 weeks. It was right in the middle of that terrible, recession, like 2010. Right. And then the job ended, and I didn't work for like 6, 8 months, and we folded the studio. I moved to an office down in Soho and kind of rebuilt. Started building my book of business slowly. My first big job came with Magnolia Bakeries. I did a bunch of other work, and then I got a really good gig with the Fulton Fish Market.
Really? Okay.
They were taking the fish market online, and so they had like they tested a whole bunch of photographers, like 6 or 7 photographers, and nobody could get it. And I got a call from some guy that I never met, but he was linked in with me. And he's like, my boss is looking for a food photographer. Can you come up and do a test? So I go up to the Fulton Fish Market, and I don't know if you've ever been in there, but it smells really bad. Like it's just horrible. But I brought all my my guns with me. I brought my medium format camera, which nobody had done. I brought a fish tank because I wanted to shoot the ice underlit I mean, I had been doing this for years, so I really knew my craft. And I did a test shoot for 2 days, and I waited 2 weeks. I didn't hear anything back. I figured, oh, forget it. I didn't get the gig. Then I got a phone call, and then it was off to the races. So for 10 months, I had to go to the Fulton Fish Market 3 days a week. I wouldn't do it 5 days a week because I have other clients. And I just shot every fish that ever, any edible seafood item. So I really learned, like, first of all, I love seafood, but, like, this was on a whole new level. So,
Right.
I got to experience that. Not for, glad I'm not there anymore, but it was a great gig, and it really re-energized my finances, because it was constant, and I was making really good money doing that.
Right. I have dabbled into food styling. Most of my food styling was people who were traveling with cookbooks, that it was something for on air TV. So it wasn't maybe one or two food styling for a product. And what I don't think people understand, you're the photographer, there's a food stylist, there's a prop person. Um, and then if you're in charge of directing it or somebody else, that photo, there's a lot of people involved. Now, what you did at Fulton Fish Market, I'm not sure you had it, you were doing the styling along with it and the props. Am I correct? You were all in one. So they got a good deal. You said in addressing this app that you made, chefsshootfood.com, you said before anyone reads a chef's menu, before they taste their food, they see it online. And if the photo doesn't hit, game over. They scroll, they move on, they eat somewhere else. You leverage 25 years of experience as a successful commercial food photographer to create this turnkey photograph solution for chefs and culinary professionals. Your course, The Recipe for Mouth-Watering Food Photography. If you have a smartphone, you can learn how to make people drool with food photos. To learn how you can take control of the content, I'm going to cough here. Something you worried about, it's the dryness of the heat we're all going through. Build your brand and pack the house. The there's so many nuances to taking a food photograph, and a lot of what we see from the influencers, the chefs, they just pull that plate out, it's online, let's take a quick photograph and pop it up. So what most of them are dealing with is bad lighting, camera angle, and sloppy plating. Tell us more about what the app offers and who should be taking the course.
Sure. So it's a course. You sign up for it and you can download. There's only 7 lessons. Each one of them is 20 minutes or less. And really, the whole point of it is, I started noticing all these bad food photos that chefs were posting, and their plating is decent, most of the time. Like a lot of the high end chefs, I mean, they can plate just as good as any food stylist. But where they lack any photographic knowledge is in their lighting and their composition. So I noticed that, like, they're shooting things at the wrong angle. A lot of them just keep the camera back too far, and you see everything in, like, you see the dish rag, and and they're in the kitchen, and the terrible light that's overhead, and they're like, oh, it's like when your kid brings you home a painting that's, it's okay, and you put it on the refrigerator, like, oh, look what I did. But the reality is that this is a serious business, and you're competing for every dollar and every customer. So if you're representing your food, and, like, as a chef, it's like a blind spot, because you know that it tastes amazing, but people aren't going to see that online. That doesn't translate. They can't smell it. They can't taste it. The only thing they can do is see it. So my definition of food photography is, does this picture make me hungry? And if the photo doesn't make me hungry, then I don't think that it succeeds. Now, what chefs have is a built-in advantage, which is they have access to food all the time. They know their menu, but they know how to cook food. And there's a very slight and subtle shift a chef can make to style the food for camera versus plating it for a customer. So
Right.
what I did was I distilled down all of my knowledge and I made it into a very easily digestible format. And like it's not for photographers. I'm gonna, like if you want to learn how to do food photography, you can learn that through this course. But it's really designed for chefs. And the reason it's designed for chefs is because they already know how to make their food. So all they have to do is follow the recipes that I create and very simple, subtle shifts. And lighting is half the game, and composition and the right camera. So like your phone does not come equipped to do food photos factory. You have to change some of the settings. So there's a module on how to do that. Then I do like really brief composition, like what are the best angles for food. I show why food photos fail and why they succeed, and then I get right into the lighting, and then I do a food styling. So really, if you just listen and watch the first four lessons, you could be shooting food in less than a week. And then I do a tutorial on how to use artificial light because a lot of chefs, they don't have time during the day to do this. So, the whole thesis here is that if you have an hour a week to shoot your own content at any time of the day or night, you could do that. It takes 5 minutes to set up, and then you just have to tweak the plating. And then I give some, food styling tips on how to plate for camera. And it's really simple.
Right.
It's done so that people can understand it. It's not photo wonky. It's not all that techno stuff with lenses and f-stops and all that crazy.
Yeah. Well, that goes if my camera can't capture it, I think I have a good eye. I just have a older version camera.
Right,
So I have my little ring light
right,
that I carry with me. I have it right now on pretty much the script because I need better lighting to see what I've written.
sure.
Um, but there are, apps and now more so, like Samsung, whatever the apps or the cameras on the phone have their own editing that's been improved. I was using Snapseed, so I could always clean it up. There's a chef that I had on, Tim Recker, and he's down in Florida. He's amazing. He posts 1 to 5 photos a day.
I see his stuff.
Okay, so there was one photo that he did, whatever the food was, it could have been an oyster with caviar, something that, and lobster, something that the food was just everything that I love. And I sent him a note. I said, love this. I said, it was so good. I was licking the screen. So that's what you want to accomplish with these
Correct.
photos. You want people to feel, salivate, and see it and going, I want that in person. So this tool, chefshootfood.com, which I'm waiting for it to float up. Maybe I'm not catching it, but there or BillBradyPhotography.com. You can find him on Instagram. So all the links will be hopefully floating up sometime soon. Um, I know that when you sent me the information, a little bit of bio, you said there's a lot of stories we could cover. So, what's a good story, one that you'd like to share that you think would be of interest to the audience? Could be food,
Well,
could be photography, could be whatever.
it's interesting. So, my job is problem solving, and a lot of things like don't go the way that you want them to go. I remember I was shooting a book uh, earlier on in my career, and I needed a young model to shoot in a cafeteria, like in a school. And my wife's cousin was like 14 at the time, and I don't know how I maneuvered it, but they said I could come up and shoot. What they didn't tell me was that I was going to be teaching 60 kids how to do photography. And so I did my thing. I did the shoot, eating in the cafeteria, and all the other shots. And then they were like, okay, so now we're going to do the food photography class. And I was like, what? Like they didn't tell me that I was doing that. And so I have to like they just like, okay, go. And I'm like, oh. So I literally had to make it up on the spot. There, and then one of my lights just broke in the middle of the shoot. And
Wow.
and I was like, and I don't know, I just pivoted and I was like, well, this is why people hire professional photographers, because you always have extra equipment. And then I put the light away. I took out another light. I said, I always have two cameras. I always have backup for everything, because you never know what's going to break and you never know when you're going to have to teach a class. And, everyone, thought it was great. Things are fun. I mean, I've had crazy experiences on set. I used to do a lot of film production. We were doing a shoot downtown, and we all parked our cars in this lot. And what we didn't realize was that the lot closed at 10 o'clock. And when you do film production, you don't ever end at 10 o'clock.
Right.
So we wrapped at like 1 in the morning, and we all went to go get our cars, and we couldn't get our cars. So we had, the prop guys, and they had their tools, and we literally took the fence apart. Because we all had our keys. We drove our cars out, and then they put the fence back perfectly. Like we didn't break anything. They literally took the fence apart and put it back together. And then I just wanted to see the look on the guy's face when he came back the next day, and there were 10 cars missing from the lot. But like goofy stuff like that. I've had
Yeah.
crazy film production, always something going wrong, and it's you're solving problems in real time. And that's
Yeah.
really the whole point of why you get paid what you get paid.
That's why you earn the big bucks, right?
That's true.
Right. Since you are a lover of food, you take many photographs. Uh, I'm going to pop in here with these last questions, but I know you like to cook, so I'm hoping to have some interesting answers from you.
Sure.
Um, what was your ultimate culinary fail?
Well, I was making a craft service meal for a film crew on a craft commercial, and I had to get the food out before the meal penalty because it's a union crew. And I decided to make a Chinese, dinner. And I grabbed, because it was a culinary studio, I grabbed some pots and pans. I grabbed a wok that was not seasoned, and I made beef and broccoli, and it tasted like just death. Like it was the worst thing I ever made. And everything else tasted amazing. And so I was quiet, like I was like, just don't eat the beef from like to the crew, don't eat the beef and broccoli. I had to make a main course, but to satisfy the meal
Labor.
requirements. But I was like, don't eat that. It's terrible. And like one person like took it and like, oh, you're right. So that was like the ultimate fail, because I was on under the gun, and I was I made this because I made this dish many times before, and it was always great. But man, the wok was not seasoned, and it tasted like metal. It was horrible.
Ooh, ooh. I'm thinking about it right now. If
In
you
front
could
of an
go back,
audience too. There was like 40 people. So
I'm trying to think. We talked last week. One of my fails was doing an apple. Uh, um, I can never say it right. I always say tortatin, but it's tatatin. Um, Puff pastry with apple and caramel. And Corby was talking about it. And he said he had difficulty. The first one, too brown, undercooked. And I was excited. I said, that was my fail too. And it just wouldn't caramelize. And the caramel was running the apple, the puff pastry. I said, I broke it up, put it in a bowl, and put ice cream on it. So that was, you drop back and punt, you figure out what to do. So luckily, nobody really, other than the one person, ate the
right.
broccoli and got it. All
I did
right.
warn them though. I warned them not to eat it. They had to taste it. So good for them.
The next question is, if you could go back and give your 18-year-old self a piece of advice, what would it be?
I would tell myself what I just told my daughter who just graduated from college, which is take time to explore the world before you get saddled with any responsibility. That you have your entire life to work, and the minute you start working, you don't stop. It's hard to take a gap. Um, so my father was Irish, Irish Welsh, and he was very stoic, and he had me working cutting lawns when I was 9 years old. So I had that work ethic, and I had to get a job, and I couldn't take any time off. And I really regret that because I would have loved to have traveled, driven around the country, gone to Europe, done some backpacking, but that wasn't in the cards.
Right. Okay. Okay. Give me.
That's
If you wake up tomorrow morning with a new talent, what would the new talent be?
I think I would want to be able to tell when somebody was telling me the truth. Um, I've had a lot of
Interesting.
experiences where I believe what people tell me at face value because I'm a pretty straightforward person, but I've been told a lot of doozies in my life and I believe them, and then it comes to pass that I don't, that wasn't true. New York is a little, a lot of people tell you how it is, but there's a lot of people that won't, they're afraid to tell you the truth. And it's much better to hear the truth, even if it's uncomfortable, than to hear a lie and make you delude yourself that something is what it isn't. So
Yeah.
I would want to be able to tell the truth.
Okay. Yeah.
You
Be
get
able
you
to
get
know when somebody's lying. Yeah.
or
Okay.
not being 100% truthful.
Okay. What two things, food items, must be in your refrigerator?
Um, I would say Hellman's mayonnaise and Grey Poupon mustard. With those two ingredients, you can pretty much salvage any, make a sauce, salvage any meal. You know, it's just very versatile.
Sounds good. What's the best bite you've had all week?
So I made a chicken tikka masala, which was pretty good. I perfected my tikka masala sauce. I realized that it's really vices, and I perfected that recipe during the pandemic, and it comes out really good. So that's one of my favorite. I get my spices at Kalustyan's in New York, so they're all authentic.
Yeah. Callustian. I worked for Van Spices and they would get some of the bulk spices. And Vans did private label. They did Martha Stewart's and they had their own label, but they're mostly private label at this point. Um, what didn't I ask you that I probably should have?
I don't know. I mean, it's kind of hard. I think we kind of covered most of it. I mean, the only yeah, honestly, that's a hard question, and I didn't fill it in because we hadn't done the thing, but yeah, I think we kind of covered most of it. Maybe you know what what would I have done differently after I graduated from school and traveled around the world? Um, I think probably what I would have done differently is I wouldn't have wasted my time on things that didn't for like advance my knowledge and career. I spent a lot of time worrying about what other people thought about me, and I was afraid to do things. And so I think that's what I would have done differently. I would have not wasted so much time and really gotten to the I would my career I would have advanced faster had I gotten more serious at a younger age.
Right. Well, I think as young people, you know, everybody wants to be loved and nobody wants to be wrong. And we accommodate others rather than ourselves so they like us. And I think that's also part of some of the things we talked about before, that people weren't truthful or gave you part of the information because they don't want you to dislike them. They don't want you to think they're stupid. So they would rather cover it up than tell you what's happening. So my theory has always been Everyone wants to be loved. Nobody wants to be wrong. If you keep that in mind, and as
Right.
young people, that self-confidence isn't there. We haven't gone through life to build it up. Well, just remind everybody, and everything has come up in the comments section, BillBradyPortraits.com, and also ChefsShootFood.com if you want to learn about getting the app for shooting digital photography for the restaurants and the chefs. I thank you so much for joining us and reaching out, and I look forward to your photographs and licking the screen as well.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
It's been a joy, Bill. Thank you, and all the best.
Thank you so much.
Okay, uh, gang, here we go. Next week's guest will be Executive Chef Gwen Gullickson. She's a chef, teacher, founder of Cape Fear's Coalition. Her CV highlights are: she just took a job at executive chef at Porter's Neck Village in North Carolina, which is senior living. She was the executive chef at the Getty Center and Robert Mondavi Wine and Food Center in California. She was the executive sous chef with the late Jean-Louis Paladin, a two Michelin star chef who we lost very early on. She was a Julia Child French Culinary Grant recipient. She was the executive chef at Wine Spectator. When she was executive chef, she received the Wine Spectator Award of Excellence. And she was part of the Madeline Kaman School for American Chefs. And Madeline Kaman came on the same time as Julia Child. Please check her out. She had a great book, When French Women Cook. So join us next week. If you need to reach me, Instagram is at Dara Cooks on Instagram, and on Facebook, The Food Enthusiast. jmoreliving.com. You can go to the website under the food column and you will find The Food Enthusiast and all 273 episodes, I think it is, are there for you to view. And also there's a link to sign up for the bi-monthly food newsletter, which is free from JMore. All shows are immediately archived in video form on JMore Living's Facebook page and jmoreliving.com. We truly appreciate it when you share our show with friends and family. Feel free to go back into our archives and enjoy past shows. We hope you'll join us next Thursday. May your plates always